continue with the next talk, and this will be Pythagoras and Mesopotamia, given by Professor Lorenzo Verderame of the Istituto Italiano di Studi Orientali. And please, Lorenzo, we are very pleased to have you with us today, and we are looking forward. Thank you, Lorenzo.
Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm very happy to participate to this meeting, hopefully in the future in person, but let's enjoy what technology offers in this very moment. A few words before I start. I thank you, Professor Musas, and the organizer for this invitation. I'm on the one hand, I'm very happy because in this very last year, a colleague from Philosophy continued to spur me to go through the pre-Socratic philosopher with a comparison with ancient Mesopotamia. So this invitation came as a kind of further element to develop this investigation. On the other hand, I think in this seminar, among very skilled and knowledgeable colleagues, I am mostly an outsider, and I explain why. Since I'm an expert of cuneiform cultures, let's say in this way, so I study Sumerian and Babylonian Akkadian. I've dealt with ancient astronomical and astrological texts, but I'm mostly an epigraphist, a philologist, and an historian. So I apologize for maybe some misuse of some terms and some very, very general consideration on the scientific point in my presentation. I'm very happy that I've been preceded by the previous speaker who gave already a kind of overview, or at least one of the points I will deal with in my presentation. So let's go to the point. So I will discuss the possible relation of Pythagoras with ancient Mesopotamia. Yes. What we know about the contacts of ancient Near Eastern cultures, and in particular of Mesopotamia with ancient Greece. In general terms, let's say that the Bronze Age, or roughly the 3rd and 2nd millennium, has two main focus. I will not speak about first or most important culture. I'm just trying to give some definition from the chronological geographical point of view. So we have Egypt on one point, and let's say the ancient Near East with the core of Mesopotamia. Of course, then you have also the Iranian plateau, China, but for my presentation, I will deal with these two cultures. By the end of the Bronze Age, so let's say between the mid and the end of the 2nd millennium, a very important change happened in this world. Mesopotamia, particularly, start to become more and more peripheric to what, by the end of the 1st millennium, is becoming the center of, let's say, the new civilization in very general terms, or the center of new strategic powers, which is the Eastern Mediterranean, and then in few centuries, the Mediterranean tout court. So we know that already in the the 3rd, and probably, but for sure in 2nd millennium, there were contact, economic, political, and probably also cultural, between ancient Mesopotamian and the Mediterranean world. this become more structured and continuous by the end of the second millennium. We have direct, sorry, we have direct evidences with materials coming from ancient Mesopotamia found in the Mediterranean. We have the direct references to realities, let's say political or ethnic realities that will become more known in the successive centuries, like Cyprus is mentioned in letters from mostly of the ancient Near Eastern courts. And we have also some references to what could be identified with, for example, for the Achaeans in the so-called Akiawa, found in the border, in the Mediterranean border of the Asia Minor. And we have presence on the other end of, let's say, Greek or Mycenaean emporia in the ancient Near East, with vases and other objects coming from the Mediterranean all along the coast of Syria, Palestine, or the Levant to Kur. So my point is that there is an increase of connection, of relation, documented in epigraphic and archaeological sources. And what is more important is that is a mutual exchange. So not only elements, cultural, economic, that go from Mesopotamia or from the east toward the west, but also a presence of Eastern Mediterranean or Western people in the ancient Near East. What about the cultural element that we can find in this period? Scholars, in particular in recent years, have developed more and more a conscious perspective on the relationship between, let's say, Mesopotamian literature and art and the early Greek phases. I show you here some of the covers of recent, not really recent, some of them are older, related to these influences of Mesopotamian elements, particularly in the Greek sources. This is Martin West's Face of Helicon, Penglay's Greek Myths and Mesopotamian, and this is a very, very recent work of Hobold on still on literature. The other volume is more general, is from the perspective of Mesopotamia, is a volume edited by Stefan Dalley, dealing with the so-called or presumed legacy of Mesopotamia, so dealing not only with the influence on Greece, but on other cultures like India and so on. So we know from long time that, for example, there are, sorry for the error, theogony, not theonogy, we are elements of contact or parallel between Hesiod's theogony, and this has been fully studied in the past and now by Hobold. We have elements from iconography which are easily and for sure related to ancient Mesopotamia, and then that can give us at least an idea of contacts. Here I've put one of the most clear, according to my humble opinion, element that are typical of Mesopotamia. This is the Capricorn, which is half fish, half goat, and is the symbol since the 3rd millennium of the god Enki, the lord of the knowledge, magic, and so on, and many other symbols of the zodiac, which are found, at least from the point of view of iconography, from the 2nd millennium Mesopotamian, spread both in the west and in the east, and have a different story. So these elements are clearly in their origin Mesopotamian, as many other iconographic motifs. What I want to underline that the origin, the Mesopotamian origin, does not mean that, of course, this literary and iconographic iconic motifs are received in, there is a filter in the culture that received this motif as another tradition, and a re-elaboration. So we will not find everywhere and always the same meaning or the exact same element coming from Mesopotamia. But at least in this case, we have a trace of contacts and movement of idea and other elements. Sorry. Okay. So what we know, on the other hand, about the contact between Mesopotamia and ancient Greece according to science. Here we come to a different perspective, because while on art and literature, the studies of these elements and so on has always been marginal, but taken in an open perspective, we have a kind of, let's say, closer reception of Mesopotamian elements related to science and to the study of ancient Mesopotamian sciences in classical studies. This may be due to the idea of the Greek miracle, and I agree on some terms, as I will show, but on the other, the debate should be more open. Indeed, there is no, in general, an absence of academic discussion about the topic of the relationship between Mesopotamian sciences and the Greek sciences in general term, of course, and the Greek one. We have often very important but isolated scholars. I've mentioned only two. Otto Neugebauer, who studied not only cuneiform mathematical and astronomical texts, but also Egyptian, Coptic, and Ethiopic, and so on. And in recent year, Francesca Rochberg has published at least 2 volumes in which she deals with the problem of the relationship between the Mesopotamian knowledge and the Greek one, and in particular in the way modern scholars deal with this relationship. In fact, normally in the Greek sources, and consequently also the classical scholars, relate most of the scientific innovation to ancient Egypt. I will not deal with this topic because it's not important for, it's not relevant for our discussion in this moment, but I would like to underline as, for example, a very important scholar who dealt with Greek, the ancient Greek, let's say, scientific or philosophical milieu or perspective, as Lloyd, was written a lot on pre-Socratics. When it comes to a comparative, he normally does this comparative with China, and we almost never found mention Mesopotamian, which, as we know now, a consistent number of sources from the point of view of mathematics, astronomy. I will not deal with other sciences like medicine and so on. So in some point, from some point of view, is really hard to understand this hostility toward Mesopotamia. This could be again a perspective related for what was, let's say, the Orient for the Greeks, and in my opinion, the problem with the Persians. So a kind of also reference toward Egypt instead of Mesopotamia. What is important for me, and I think is one of the perspectives that should be developed in future and must be one of the main focus of scholar, is not to identify parallel or element of Mesopotamian tradition in Greece and vice versa, of course, because now it has become more and more evident that you can find a parallel. Of course, you have to justify parallels, not that you find some element in one culture and another element in another culture. But from my point of view, and this is not only my point of view, the problem is the nature of the contact. So how and when this element traveled from ancient Near East to Greece, and again, vice versa. I just like to mention two volumes that try to deal with the topic I've just discussed. So the way the classic scholars build the idea of ancient Greece as an isolated culture and so on. And on the other hand, some possible hints from other tradition. One is the most famous and controversial Black Athena of Martin Bernal. We can agree, we cannot disagree, but at least he raised the problem. The other is a less known work, very stimulating, by Michael Astur, called Elleno-Semitica, trying to identify the way through this culture and tradition moved from the Near East and the Greece. The only, let's say, comparative study that I know in general term, not as article or what else, is the one from the general work of a very popular book of André Pichot, La naissance de la science, where he deals with Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece, also comparing the three cultures. So, coming now to Pythagoras, what we can identify as element of Pythagoras life and knowledge, tradition, or discipline related to the ancient Mesopotamia. From my perspective, we have to differentiate, of course, direct and indirect evidence for this relationship. So direct, a contact, as we will say, a presumed travel of the Pythagoras in Babylon. Of course, even if this evidence is direct, should be critically analyzed. Indirect references, so let's say parallels or element which presumes come from the Mesopotamian tradition. Both go through the big problem of the life of Pythagoras. I'm not an expert. I've learned a lot preparing this presentation. There is abundant literature about the life of Pythagoras, and we know that, as one of the scholars say, we have two extremes. So we may know very few if we relate only to the sure sources about Pythagoras' life, or on the other hand, we know too much if we take all the references in classic authors about Pythagoras' life. So we have for the problem of analysis, which is not mine, I'm lucky enough, is of classic scholars, which is the tradition about Pythagoras, his life, and his circle, the Pythagorean, and this tradition, the Pythagorean. We have few sure evidence about, these are some of the evidence about the life of Pythagoras. We know that he lived between the 570 and the end of the 6th century BCE, which is from Samos in Ionia, and at some point, possibly around 530 BC, he moved to southern Italy, Croton. We don't know, according to the tradition, if directly or roaming around. Elea is mentioned in some authors, another important center of Magna Graecia. Another important reference for sure is that he was the creator of what we know as Pythagorism or Pythagorean circle. There's a lot of controversy about the life of Pythagoras, related to the fact that on the one hand, it's presumed that he wrote nothing, so he based mostly on oral transmission, oral culture. And on the other, that we have a lot of later, in some cases, very late author that gives a lot of information, even detailed, about the life of Pythagoras. We have, I'm not an expert, at least 2 life of Pythagoras, from Iamblichus and so on. And so there is a really excessive information about his life. I think it's very important to underline that we have at least 2 authors that mention Pythagoras, which are almost contemporary to him. One is Xenophanes of Colophon, who wrote many satires, and one is about Pythagoras, and he mentioned the idea of transmigration of the souls, so metempsychosis. So we can for sure know that Pythagoras was known to his contemporaries for this theory. Another mention by a contemporary author of Pythagoras is in Heraclitus. Then we have 3 authors that wrote about Pythagoras in the 4th century, but the most relevant information we have about Pythagoras are from author from 1 millennium after Pythagoras, and we will deal with this en passant in the next slide. So just to give an idea of what really we know about Pythagoras, how we know these things about Pythagoras. We always have to remember that we have very few detailed information from contemporaries and a lot of information from later authors that created an idea of Pythagoras and Pythagoreanism according to the tradition and the traditions, because many have claimed, presumed different identity and personality of Pythagoras according to their own perspective. So about the few things we know about Pythagoras, that Pythagoras theories according to this author, that we can relate to the ancient Mesopotamia or the Near East, or with other culture. One of the main points is the question of oral transmission of his knowledge. So the presumed idea that Pythagoras wrote nothing. This aspect is well known in the ancient Near East, in particular from Assyria and Babylonia of the first millennium, where most of the knowledge is transmitted within the scribal circles, which are mostly families, and everything is transmitted from the mouth of the master to the ear of the disciple. So this idea of the oral transmission is well known in the ancient Near East, but now, but here we come to another aspect that, according to the most important scholar of Pythagoras of the recent years, this is a late tradition about Pythagoras. That is to say that Pythagoras indeed wrote something. This has been lost, and the idea of the oral culture, oral transmission would be later, so apocryphous tradition. We know that he did a lot of numbers and numerology, and the idea that numbers are the real essence of the universe, and everything could be understood through numbers. This has a direct parallel in Mesopotamia, where indeed numbers are, we can say, the base and the column of the economy and the state. We have since the third millennium a very developed mathematical knowledge, mostly practical, as we will see. And since the beginning of the cuneiform tradition, from the third millennium onward, we have a kind of a theological, hermetic, scribal reflection on numbers. So from the beginning of the second millennium, we have numbers for the gods. We have some cryptical, few indeed, texts which are all written in number, kind of ciphered text. And from the first millennium, we have esoteric commentary with equation of numbers, letters, planets, trees, metals, and so on. So this idea of the relationship between signs, letters, even if we don't have letters in cuneiform, but ideogram and syllabogram, and numbers and other aspects of the reality is well known and become fully developed in a kind of theological perspective in the first millennium BCE. Just one moment, I apologize because I can't see the clock. Okay, I think I have 5 minutes. Can you see my
Yes, very well.
Yeah, thank you. I will go a little bit faster. And also the aspect, this aspect of numerology that will be developed in what is known in the Hebrew tradition as gematria and notaricon, so kind of esoteric knowledge through numbers and equation with letters and symbols, is related also to planets, mathematics, and so on. Other aspects of the Pythagoras discipline and Pythagorism is on the other hand not known in ancient Mesopotamia. So the idea of transmigration of the souls, at least for the cuneiform tradition, that is from the third to the millennium to the mid of the first millennium, is almost unknown. And this is also the case of vegetarianism and kind of dietary rules. We have, of course, taboo and diet prescriptions in ancient Mesopotamia, but we don't have a philosophy in this sense that could be more related to Iran and India. Iran for the for this kind of idea of the souls. I think the Fravashi, but this is not my field of expertise, or India to Kur. And for the dietary, we could recall maybe the gymnosophist mentioned by Diogenes Laertius, that is Indian sage traveling in ancient Near East and Eastern Mesopotamia. So, what about the scientific knowledge, Mesopotamian scientific knowledge and Pythagoras? As I said, we have abundant evidence, and when I say abundant, we have thousands of astronomical texts, very less information about mathematics and geometry, but still evidence, and so on. An important, very important point that should be emphasized is that all these sources coming from ancient Mesopotamian were practical, in fact, so is applied mathematics. We have a problem and exercise on the one hand, and reference works on the other hand, so a list of stars or list of coefficients and so on. We don't have this perspective that will become philosophy of the Greek, and this is the real Greek miracle, this idea of demonstration of laws and principles. We never found this idea with perspective or this interest in Mesopotamian sources. I will go faster because the previous speaker showed some elements. We know from ancient Mesopotamia evidence that the theorem of Pythagoras was somehow known, or best to say applied, since the 18th century. We have at least 3 sources that show that the theorem is applied. We have later sources from the Seleucid period, but from this period we can imagine that there was already enough contact between Greece and Mesopotamia, so it's not worthwhile to discuss if it's Mesopotamian or Greek. These 3 sources from the 18th century are indeed different, because we have a list of coefficients. Sorry, to whom might be interested, I refer to the important volume of Eleanor Robson, Mathematics in Ancient Iraq, from which I take some of the sentences I will quote, because I'm not a historian of mathematics nor a mathematician. For example, the tablet Plimpton 322 is a list of coefficients, and quoting Robson, the central 2 columns list the widths and diagonals of 15 right-angled triangles, apparently sorted in descending order of acuteness. The first surviving column seemingly lists the ratios of the square on the diagonal to the square on the width of each triangle. The other text always mentioned and shown is an exercise tablet, so it's written by a pupil, by a student, came from the Yale Babylonian collection, where he found the length of the squares diagonal by multiplying the side by the constant 1, exactly as stated in the coefficient list, in another coefficient list. In both cases, so we have practical. One is a problem solved by the student, the other is a list of coefficients that show that a kind of knowledge of this idea developed from the point of view of, by Pythagoras, but the rule has never been demonstrated or stated. I will go now very quickly to my conclusion. It's possible to trace a direct connection of Pythagoras with Babylon or the ancient Near East. The later writer, like Herodotus and Isocrates, mention a travel in Egypt, while the very later, almost 700 or 7th century, sorry, or 8th century after Pythagoras, Porphyry of Tyre, and Diogenes Laertius, or Iamblichus mention a travel to Babylon with the soldier of Cambyses. We don't know if this is real or not. We don't know if Pythagoras never traveled in ancient Greece, but what we know is that, on the contrary, ancient Mesopotamia was present in the island of Samos. These are four very interesting objects. They are bronze figurine. We don't know if they were part of furniture or cauldron or what else. They are for sure of Mesopotamian, if not Assyrian origin. This is the Mushkushu, the beast of Marduk. These are other iconic motifs well known in Mesopotamian. And they were found in the temple of Hera in Samos, whose tradition shows some other connection with the ancient Near East, like the fact that during the procession of the goddess, we have the bathing and the dressing of the statue, which were one of the crucial points of the annual festival of the god and the statue in ancient Mesopotamia. I will not go further. I can share the PowerPoint. Who is interested can go through these references. So we know that Assyrian people or Near Eastern people were present in Samos in the first millennium BC and devoted some object to Hera in Samos. So other sources in the conclusion, like the small treasure of Near Eastern seals found in Thebes in Boeotia, show that the relationship, not only economic, but also political and cultural with ancient Greece and Mesopotamia already existed by the first millennium. So we don't have to prove this. On the one hand, so we have that Mesopotamia was present in the West. The trait and the way culture, literature, art, and so on moved and were received in Greece. And on the contrary, the way Greek motifs were received in Mesopotamia are still to be investigated. What we know is that scholars, people, goods always travel in the ancient Near East and the Eastern Mesopotamia. And the idea that we have of Pythagoras as one of the most ancient and most prominent traveler scholar of the antique, moving at least from Samos to South Italy, if not in Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, is well proven now by the sources. Thank you. I hope I've given my lecture in time. Okay, exceeded 4 minutes. I apologize and thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lorenzo. There is no problem at all with time. Well, first of all, we're in Greece, but not only for this, mainly because we have the luxury of having a long period between the two sessions, in fact. And